So remember what's happening now. We're at the point of the story where we're actually leaving Mitzrayim. Okay? Pashas Beshalach. The section of Beshalach, Sheba Meduber, which discusses, which speaks of Oidois Shleimus HaYetziyah MiMitzrayim, about the complete departure from Egypt. The word Shleimus, of course, means complete. The word Shleimus also means peaceful. That it's done, it's over, you're not going back. Shehi, and the Rabbi immediately says that Exodus is ha'achana l'matan Torah. It's a preparation for Hashem giving us the Torah. Kamei it says in the pasuk. This, of course, is in our Pasha, in Pasha Shmos. Quote: "Vayitziach ha'am miMitzrayim." When you will take this nation out of Egypt, Tavdu nesalekim al hahar hazeh. You will serve God on this mountain. And you see what the Rebbe does in this paragraph. It's what I've been doing in every class since the beginning. He doesn't separate Matan Torah from Mitzrayim. It's not two things. We're not free because we have no masters. We're free because Hashem is our master. Now again, as a good American, that doesn't seem right. But if you think a little bit, freedom is not I can do whatever I want. Freedom means I have the power to do what I need to. What's right. And that takes koyach, it takes strength, it takes maturity. And that's empowered by the Torah. It's empowered by our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So now look at footnote 19. Okay, look at the bottom. I have 2 and then 1. Footnote 19. Ubefrat. The idea that you cannot separate the Exodus account, the story of us going out of Mitzrayim, and the event of Hashem giving us the Torah, is especially underscored al pi hamevuar b'drushei Chasidus, as Chasidus explains it. What does Chasidus say? Sha'inyan de kriyas yamsuf kishala atzmei, the event of the splitting of the sea, in and of itself. Parenthesis, Neisaf al hashleimus the Yetzias Mitzrayim. First of all, it marks the end of the Exodus. We went out of Egypt completely when the Mitzrayim died, as you're going to see in a moment. Hu hachana lamatan Torah. It sets up the event of us receiving the Torah and Hashem giving it to us. Ki, b'kriyas yamsuf, when Hashem split the sea, hayachibur the yam v'yabasha, there was a fusion of land and sea. In other words, Almadisgasya, the Almadisgalia, the revealed world and the concealed world, right? We all understand, it's brought in so many Mari Chasidus, that Kriyas Yamsuf was not just a physical story, not just a physical event of us being saved from the Egyptians, but it was a mystical fusion of land and sea. Spiritually, there's land and there's the sea. They're two different worlds. The event of Kriyas Yamsuf is the mystical fusion between land and sea. The mystical fusion between land and sea means bringing together a world where all you see is your source, like water, and a world where all you see is yourself, like land, right? We live outside of our source. If we come from the earth, well, God forbid we should be buried in the earth, right? If you're a fish, you come from the sea, God forbid you should be outside of the sea. So there's a mysticism to Kriyas Yamsuf. It brings together the idea of land, which means separateness from your source, and the idea of sea, which means unity with your source, which was a spiritual step in what Torah is about. Let's continue to read. Chizui ha'achana, which is a necessary step of preparation, lahachibur dal yenim v'tachtenim, to join together the high and the low, that means heaven and earth, which takes place by Matan Torah. So you can't separate becoming a free people, but becoming the nation of God, become one and the same thing. So going out of Mitzrayim, leaving the land physically, which happened in the Pasuk Bashalach, which of course will end when the sea splits and the Egyptians drown, is part and parcel, is a part of the story of us becoming free by receiving Hashem's Torah. Now go back to footnote 17. And this is a very simple footnote. This is not mystical, it's very practical. And I'm reading it inside. Ki shevayar Yisrael es Mitzrayim. When the sea splits, the Jewish people enter into the sea, correct? They curve around and they come back on the same side. The Egyptians follow them into the sea and then they get flooded. They all get drowned. And the Jewish people got to see the Egyptians mace, that means dead, al sfas hayam, on the sea's edge. So Rashi says, she polton hayam al sfasai, the sea spit them out. And they ended up, all these dead bodies were washed ashore. Kedei shelayemru Yisrael, so that the Jewish people should not say and fear, Kishem she'anu eilim mitzad, just as we emerge from the sea on this side, kachem eilin mitzad acher rochek mimenu, they're also emerging from the sea on another side far from us, v'yirdefu acharenu, and they continue pursuing us, chasing us. So the Jewish people not only survive, but they get to see that their enemy is dead. By knowing that their enemy is dead, they know for sure he's not coming back. Finished, over, done, not coming back. So the Rebbe says, until we see the dead Egyptians on the seashore, we haven't rid ourselves, we haven't shaken off their control over ourselves. Until that moment, we continue to carry a fear of Egypt with us. Now that's not the same thing as becoming free. But it means at least I'm not afraid of this boogeyman. I got other boogeymen to be afraid of. But this boogeyman, Egypt, I'm no longer afraid of. So Pashas Beshalach is going to begin, and we're going to be learning this for a while, with us physically leaving the space of Egypt, going out into the desert, and then it culminates, in part at least, when they all drown at Yamsuf. Turn the page, please. We're going to page 299. Okay? Now, I don't have a lot to say. The reason I don't have a lot to say is because I said it already. I said it repeatedly. That it all leads to the Torah. It all leads to becoming the nation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So what are they saying in the beginning of Pashas Beshalach? It's this, what happens? We leave Mitzrayim, we leave Egypt, right? And the Torah tells us that Hashem took us on a circuitous route. To go from Egypt to Israel is not a long trip. They border each other. Just go due north. You want to be on the western edge of Egypt, on the eastern edge of Egypt, pardon me. Egypt extends into the Mediterranean much further west than Eretz Yisrael. But if you are in northeastern Egypt, you look up, that's Israel. That's it. Just straight up. Whoop. What separates Egypt from Israel? A river that's called Nachal Mitzrayim. The Torah calls it Nachal Mitzrayim. I don't know what that river is today. I don't know if the river still exists. But in the Torah there's a river, which was the border between Mitzrayim, and across that border is Canaan. Go straight up. Now, first of all, there's a medrash, which you may or may not know about, that there were a group of Jews from the tribe of Ephraim, Bnei Ephraim, who calculated that the Egyptian exile was supposed to be for 400 years. And when the 400 years ended, they collected and they left. 30 years before the Jewish people actually left Egypt, there was a whole group of people from Bnei Ephraim. In the Gemara, they're called the Bnei Beseira. There's a Tana and a Amayr, Behuda ben Beseira, a Tana. And the Bnei Beseira are considered the Bnei Ephraim, that they left Egypt 30 years before us, and they went due north. They went straight across from Egypt into Israel, into Canaan. Who were the first people that you encountered? The Plishtim. The Philistines. And they wiped them out to a man, woman, and child. They killed every single one of them. Now the Tanakh, the Novi, Ezekiel, Yecheskel tells a story about the Thomas HaYaveshis, that there were these bones of deceased Jews that Yecheskel resurrected. Are you familiar with the story? It's in Tanakh, that there was a whole one who resurrected. And of course, there's so many different interpretations of what that story is and how we understand that story. But one of the simpler versions of the story is that these are these Bnei Ephraim. The Jews who had left Egypt before the rest of us, 30 years before, because there's a contradiction in the numbers. In one place it says 400 years, in another place it says 430 years, and then the question becomes, when you start the count, do you count from when Avraham Avinu was 70, or do you count from when Avraham Avinu was 100? They counted 40 years when Avraham Avinu was 70, and the right count was when Avraham Avinu was 100. They left 30 before they wiped out the commandments. So Jews knew that going due north is not so simple. Why? Because they got reports that their brethren who had left 30 years ahead of them never got to their destination. Hashem promised us to give us the land of Canaan and to make it into Eretz Yisrael, the land of the Jewish people, Eretz Yisrael, Eretz HaKodesh, and they were wiped out. They were killed to a man, woman, and a child. So Pashas Beshalach begins by Hashem, the Torah, telling us that Hashem didn't take us on the same route. He didn't take us due north. He took us east. He took us east, away from Eretz Yisrael. We're underneath Israel, we're going east. But Pashtus, the simple reason is, again, because the Jewish people would have been petrified to go due north, because they had precedent. Their ancestors, their cousins, 30 years earlier, it's not that long ago, marched out of Mitzrayim, they went due north, and they were destroyed, they were decimated. Now, there's a lot more Jews, but the Jews were not exactly the world's greatest warriors at this point, right? They knew how to build mud bricks and to lay foundations for buildings. That's about all they knew. So Hashem is taking them on a long trip. And of course, the way it's understood psychologically is this is a process of rehabilitation. You'll go into Israel when you're ready. Let's make you into a mensch. Now you must understand that as the story plays out, there's a Rambam, by the way, in the middle of Ruchim. There we go. Okay. Rambam writes that the reason we spent 40 years in the desert is because we needed rehabilitation. Now the problem with that Rambam is, the Torah gives another reason. What is the reason the Torah gives? The spies, the Meraglim, we didn't want to go into the land. We didn't want the land. God said, you don't want the land, I won't give it to you, I'll give it to your kids. The Rambam writes, nevertheless, that the 40 years in the desert were a process of rehabilitation, being born as a nation. So who's right and who's wrong? Did we spend 40 years in the desert because we didn't want to go into Israel, or did we spend 40 years in the desert because we needed to be rehabilitated? And the answer is both. You know what both means? God wanted everything to happen very fast. And you know how it can happen very fast? You know how you can take a total slave, make him totally free overnight? If he has trust. This is the test. This is the story. This is the story of the Chumash. Hashem says, gicher, gicher, gicher. Schneller, schneller, schneller. Let's do it like this. Fast, fast, fast. 18 months from the time we leave Egypt to come into Yisrael. That was the plan. We slowed him down. We slowed him down because we simply could not keep up. We couldn't keep up psychologically. We couldn't keep up spiritually. So the Rambam is right and the Chumash is right. The Rambam is right. We needed those 40 years for rehabilitation. But the reason we needed the 4 years rehabilitation is because we couldn't meet the challenge that the Eibishter gave us. And the challenge that the Eibishter gave us is, I am making you free. I'm going to do the greatest miracles for you. And I want in return complete trust. Close your eyes and follow. And we kept opening up one eye to take a peek. You understand? That's the story of the Chumash. And when you think about it, it's awesome. It makes sense. It really does make sense. It makes sense that Hashem has the power to free us. That means to rehabilitate us, to make us new people very quickly if we can trust Him. And it also makes sense that it's very hard for us to trust. Both parts of the story make a lot of sense. So what's ended up happening is the plan A was going to happen very fast. So when it says in our Pasha, in Pashat B'Shalach, that Hashem doesn't take them due north, straight up into Yisrael through Plishtim, but instead that they go east, that didn't mean they were going to spend 40 years in the desert. It just meant they would spend a few more days. As our Sichos is going to say, they were 11 days outside of Eretz Yisrael. They were 11 days outside of Eretz Yisrael. 11 days. They could have gone in 11 days. It takes 40 years in 11 days. Okay? So, understand that when the Chumash tells us this following story, once upon a time there were a whole bunch of Jews who left Egypt. And they went straight north into Eretz Yisrael and they got wiped out. So the Jewish people leave the second time when the Exodus actually occurs, Hashem takes us east. But east doesn't mean 40 years, east means more than 11 days, that's it. A couple of months. But the whole vision of the Eibishter, as we read the story in the Chumash, is, I'm going to give you everything, you need to give me everything, which is trust, which is faith. And it's not easy. So we end up spending 40 years in the Midbar. Let's read the Sikh inside. Al Pasuk, it says in the Pasuk, page 299, V'lei Nacham v'Gomer. Hashem did not lead us due north. He didn't take us directly into Egypt on the shortest possible, most direct possible route, because we couldn't handle the meaning of the Plishtim, of the Philistines. So now understand, when Hashem takes us east, there are two plans in the taking us east also. The original plan, when Hashem will take us east, it won't happen in 11 days. But it's not going to take 40 years either. It'll happen in a few months. Also very accelerated. Not 11 days, but very, very accelerated. In other words, girls, what the deal is, if Hashem gives you a challenge, He knows you can meet it. In other words, the Torah says, Hashem says, you can't do this in 11 days, but you can do this in 3 months or a year and a half. So Hashem makes huge demands of us. And we feel, right, INF, it's not fair. Right? The Eibishter says, I know what fairness is. It's tough, but it's not impossible. Because if it would be impossible, I wouldn't demand it. So on the one hand, Hashem is saying, I'm not going to take you into Exile in 11 days because you're never going to make it. but I'm going to take you in a year and a half. You better keep up. And we failed to keep up. So a year and a half turns into 40 years. So there's two sides. One side is, quote, Hashem is very understanding, and the other side is Hashem isn't understanding at all. As fast as a human being could possibly move from slavery to freedom, that's how fast Hashem wants us to move. And we drag our feet, and we keep tripping. Okay? So, this is the downside. Am I clear? Let me repeat myself, okay? The shortest route from Egypt to Israel is 11 days. Hashem doesn't take us on this route. Because He knows our faith is not ready for this kind of a test. He takes us east. But His plan was not that east should take 40 years. His plan was that east should take a few more months, or maybe a year and a half, and then we would go into Israel. As it turned out, not only were we not ready to go due north, even the plan of us going into Egypt after a year and a half, we blew it up. It was too intense. And we ended up spending 40 years in the Midbar until we were ready to go into Israel. You follow? So now, according to this version of the story, basically what you have is when the Jewish people were born as a nation, how do you say this nicely? We stunk it up time after time after time. We really did. We failed. Now, the tests that we were given, the challenges that we were given were extraordinary. Hashem gave us so much, but He wanted so much back. Everybody knows how difficult. It's much easier to do a mitzvah than to have to trust Hashem. And the trust tests that the Yidden had were so big and so hard, and they were so immature, so unready for it. They failed those tests of faith again and again and again. They kept on failing. Why? It was too much. You follow? Correct? There was a plan to go in a certain period of time that didn't work out. It took 40 years. So now comes an interesting question. We spent 40 years in the desert because we made a mistake, because we were a disappointment. We didn't accomplish it, yeah? Is there a silver lining to that cloud? We spent 40 years in the desert because we didn't have enough emunah. We couldn't keep up with the plan and the direction and the trajectory that God Almighty initiated for us. Is there a silver lining to that cloud? And this Sichos says, yeah. It couldn't happen in 11 days. It could have happened in a relatively short period of time. It ended up taking 40 years. There's an upside to that. This slowing it all down has an upside. Now you see, you have to understand the big picture. The big picture is if we pass all those tests of faith, if we would have succeeded all those tests, the first Beis HaMikdash would never been destroyed. Mashiach would have come. And I don't mean this in this simplistic, yippee-doo, no problems kind of way. It means we would have grown up quicker. And that's what this is about. On this earth, we have to be God's nation. That's not easy. We all understand that that's not easy. But that's the challenge. That's what the Eibishter is expecting from us. That's the deal. This is the story. If we succeed, if we manage to meet the accelerated timetable, so that we have an accelerated process to the Jewish people maturing, which is what Mashiach is. We slowed it all down. It's taken thousands of years for Mashiach to come, correct? But there's a silver lining, there's an upside to this downside. Let's find out what it is. And we're out of time basically, but let's read a little bit. Isa b'Medrash, the Medrash says, Mitzrayim Eretz Yisrael is Yud Aleph Masayis. In theory, from Egypt to Israel is 11 stops. Now girls, these 11 stops doesn't mean due north. It doesn't mean going through Plishtim. It means going east and going around. In other words, going straight from Mitzrayim into Yisrael is even less than 11 stops. The longer route was supposed to be 11 stops. What ends up happening is Hashem carries us. That's what the word Nasa means. Hashem carries us through the desert over the course of 40 years. It says in the Pasuk, it was 11 days from Sinai. And of course, 11 days is interpreted to mean 11 stops along the way. And it all culminates the 40 years later. We've taken 40 years to take 11 stops. Shouldn't have taken 42, should have taken 11. It should happen much more quickly. We couldn't keep up with the Eibishter's pace. It took a long time. So Hashem doesn't take them on a very short route, He takes them on a longer route. So the shortest of all routes, Hashem knew we couldn't do. The shorter route, Hashem expected us to meet. And when we failed to meet it, it ended up taking 40 years. So here's the question. I'm going to stop right now. We'll have to continue this next time. The question is there an upside to the fact that it took us 40 years to finish this journey? We'll see what happens next time.